When we talk about history, most people immediately think of emperors, kings, or great conquerors whose names were carved into stone. We picture golden crowns, armies marching under banners, and stories of victories that shaped nations. But sometimes, history isn't about those who sat on thrones. Sometimes, it's about someone who came from nothing, someone who was never supposed to be remembered at all. Yet their courage left a mark that time could never erase. One of those people was Spartacus. Now let me take you back to ancient Rome. Rome was the strongest empire in the world at that time. Its reach stretched far and wide, its armies were feared by everyone, and its wealth seemed endless. But underneath all that power and glory, there was a darker truth. Rome was built on the suffering of countless slaves. These were men and women who had been captured in wars, sold like property, stripped of their names and identities. They were forced to work, to fight, and to serve a society that didn't see them as human beings. And among these nameless masses, one man stood up. One man decided he would not live his life in chains. His name was Spartacus. Spartacus wasn't born into slavery. He was a Thracian, from the lands of Eastern Europe, a man who once lived free. He had served as a soldier, strong and skilled, used to the hardships of battle. But somewhere along the road, he was captured and dragged into the life of a slave. Imagine that going from being a free man, carrying a sword for your own people, to suddenly being treated like property, sold, and used for the entertainment of others. That was the fate of Spartacus. His strength and discipline caught the eyes of the Romans, and instead of sending him to the fields, they sent him to a gladiator school in Capua. These schools were not schools in the way we think of them today. They were prisons of violence. Men were trained to fight to the death for the entertainment of the Roman people. Every day was a lesson in cruelty. Every man you trained beside could be the man you fought against tomorrow. And when you stepped into the arena, it was never just about skill, it was about survival. The crowd cheered for blood, and the only way to live another day was to fight harder than everyone else. But for Spartacus, the arena wasn't just about surviving. Every fight reminded him of what he had lost. Every roar of the crowd, every command from his masters lit a fire inside him. He didn't want glory. He didn't want to be remembered as some champion of the arena. He wanted freedom. He wanted to break the chains, not just for himself, but for everyone who had been thrown into this life against their will. And then, in 73 BCE, the chance came. Spartacus, along with about 70 of his fellow gladiators, decided enough was enough. Armed with nothing but kitchen knives and whatever weapons they could get their hands on, they fought their way out of the gladiator school. Think about the courage that took 70 men going up against guards and soldiers, knowing that if they failed, death would be certain. But they didn't fail. They escaped. And that escape wasn't just the start of their freedom. It was the beginning of something much bigger than they could have imagined. At first, they were just a small group of fugitives hiding in the hills. But word travels fast. Other slaves who had been beaten and abused heard of their escape. They heard that a group of gladiators had broken free and were fighting back. And slowly, one by one, more people began to join them. What started as 70 men soon became hundreds, then thousands. Families, runaway slaves, men who had nothing left to lose, all of them, came to Spartacus. They didn't just see him as a fighter, they saw him as a leader, someone who could give them hope. And Spartacus didn't let them down. He organized them, trained them, and gave them purpose. These were not professional soldiers. Many were just ordinary people who had suffered under Rome. But under Spartacus, they became an army of slaves, standing against the greatest empire in the world. And to the shock of everyone, they began to win. Time after time, the Romans sent troops to put them down. And time after time, Spartacus and his followers defeated them. These victories weren't just battles, they were messages that Rome wasn't untouchable. messages that slaves weren't powerless. For the first time, the empire felt vulnerable, and that terrified them. But Spartacus wasn't fighting for glory. He wasn't trying to become a king or take Rome for himself. His dream was simple. He wanted to lead his people out of Italy, over the Alps, and back to their homelands where they could live free. That was his vision. He wanted an end to the blood, an end to the suffering, and a chance for peace. But dreams don't always match reality. The rebellion grew so large that it became difficult to control. Some of his followers wanted revenge. Some wanted to plunder. And not everyone agreed on the same path. Meanwhile, Rome was not about to sit quietly while its pride was wounded. They had been embarrassed enough, and now they were ready to crush the rebellion for good. The Senate gave command to Marcus Crassus, one of Rome's wealthiest and most ruthless men. He brought discipline, resources, and a determination to end Spartacus once and for all. The final battles were brutal. Spartacus and his followers fought with everything they had, but the odds were against them. Rome was throwing everything it had into this war. In 71 BCE, the rebellion faced its last stand. Spartacus, knowing the end was near, refused to run. He refused to hide. Instead, he fought like the warrior he had always been. They say he charged into battle, cutting through enemies with all the fury of a man who would rather die free than live in chains. He fell on the battlefield, surrounded by the men he had led, fighting to the very end. His body was never found, but his spirit never needed a grave. Rome crushed the rebellion. 6,000 captured rebels were crucified along the Appian Way, a grim warning to anyone who dared to rise against the empire again. But even in defeat, Spartacus's name lived on. He became more than a man. He became a symbol of courage, of defiance, and of the unbreakable human desire for freedom. Spartacus's war may have ended in blood, but his story didn't die with him. His name outlived the generals who defeated him. His memory survived longer than the empire that tried to erase him. And that's the power of his legacy. He showed the world that even those born without power, even those chained and forgotten, could rise and challenge the greatest force of their time. Spartacus was not a king, not a ruler, not a conqueror in the traditional sense. He was a man who chose freedom over fear, and that choice made him unforgettable.